All right, let's see here. I think we're ready to begin. So I haven't turned on my camera today, mainly because it's still glitching out. I might have to get a non-potato for a camera. Let's see if it'll work. Also, let's see. Yeah, see, it's still glitching. Oh well, okay. I guess it's okay right now. It's not, well, nah, it's terrible. So, okay. Today, basically, I want to talk about the concepts of software design. And I guess I really probably just want to do it more in the context of project. So, basically, we'll talk about everything in terms of the project, but really, I mean, the idea is that you will eventually do this on other projects and other things. So, okay, so let's think about how this works. So how do you design something like this? Right, so here's project one, right, Pyopoly. And here's something that the TA made. So we have all this stuff here. Here's all the rules of the game. And then here, let's see, maybe I'll enlarge it a bit. Here is some of the implementation details. So it kind of tells you how to go about it, but like, you know, let's think about this in a kind of more design-oriented way. So basically, okay, let's think about how to design this thing. So I've given you the idea of the design. So let's pull up maybe an Inkscape or something. So let's get rid of all this. And let's make a little flowchart of the game. Okay. So maybe no, this is not going to work, so we'll just do it this way. Okay, so what kind of things did I require? I'll just have to flip back and forth. So what kind of things did I require? So I required a function called playGame, a function called takeTurn, and a function called format display. And then I gave you the functions. What functions did I give? I think they were like display board. We'll look it up in just a second. So let's make a box and put the word start in it. So this is basically main, right? So what do we do after main? So after main, what we have to do is, if you think about it, we need to load the board, right? So we basically want to call a load board function. And what did I call my load board function? Let's see here. I called it load map. So here's load map. And so what is load map going to do? Right, load map is going to, let's see, where's the good. So load map will load the map. And then what happens if that's successful? right? I forget, I think, is there a way to make the end of a thing have an arrow? I should just Google it. Okay. Oh, nope, not that one. There we go. Whoops. There we go. Cool. So, basically, if it fails, then what are we going to do? Now that I've spent 5 minutes looking for an arrowhead. So if it fails, what we're going to do is we're going to end the program, right? And the reason why we want to end the program is because nothing else is going to work if there's no board loaded. Is this lecture totally about the project? Sure. I mean, so it's about software design, but I figured I could do it in context of the project. It's not drawing. Oh well. There we go. Okay. Do we store the map in a variable after calling load map? Yes. So basically what you're going to do after that, so if it works, so if load map works, it's going to return a non-empty list. So let me, and so basically here we can say list non-empty. And so what do? Yes, you're going to have to store that. You're going to have to store the result in a variable. So for instance, like if I just called load map, let's say let's call load map on, I think I called it pyopoly, pyop2.csv. The list equals this, print out the list. And so if we run this, it should, I think, do something good. So you see what this is going to output. We could even make it a little bit more helpful. We could say for, line in the list, print line. And that way we can actually see things a little bit better. So you basically see that what's happening is that the list is going to be a bunch of dictionaries like this where it says the place is Hilltop Circle, the abbreviation is Go, the color of it is Go, I guess. Position 0, price -1, which just means you can't buy it. Rent is 0, building rent 4, building cost is 5. So basically, I think technically these all should be set to -1. If the price is -1, you can't build anything. Will you be using classes on this assignment? No. You'll probably be using classes for the next project, which I have basically written up, but yes. Okay. So this is the this is one of the files that I provided for you. This is project 1 board1.csv. Okay. So, all right. So what happens if, let's just call this the prog design.svg. Okay. So now let's ask, what happens if the list is non-empty? So basically, if the list is non-empty, then we have to do the play game function, right? So we start the play game function, right? And so what do you do when you start the play game function, right? You're going to want to get some user input. So get the user name and symbols. So what if you choose to reprompt, right? Then what you can do is you can do something like this. Let's see. Oops. It's not gonna work. Something like this, right? Where you head out from the node and head back in, and then this would be reprompt if it fails. So that's your choice. You can either reprompt or you can just terminate. I think that it's fine to just terminate, mainly because okay, so now you're going to get the username and symbols. So let me see if I can do this better this time. Nope, not really. Okay, whatever. So here you have to reprompt if good, or I'm sorry, if bad, right? So what makes it bad, right? If the symbol is not one capital, or, yeah, that's basically it. Or technically, if the second person picks the same symbol as the first person. Okay? So well, if it returns null, if it returns an empty list, then you can just exit the program. Not exit using exit, but you can just end the program. Okay. All right, so once you get the username, I don't care if they enter something bad, like technically their name isn't really that important as long as their symbol is unique, right? Because if their symbol isn't unique, then you won't be able to detect who is who on the board. Okay. So how do we play the game? Right, the first thing is you're going to roll the dice. And then once you roll the dice, what are you going to do? You're going to move the player. Right? And so this always, like, it doesn't matter what happens. As soon as you roll the dice, you're going to move the player. And that's it. So then you have a bunch of stuff to do. So what you're going to do here is you're going to say, okay, let's maybe, actually we can even just keep this square shape the same. So once you move the player, then actually the first thing you need to do is calculate rents for the position that they landed on. Right? Because if you calculate their rent, basically whenever you land on a position in Monopoly, you have to you have to pay the rent first before you buy any properties or do anything. So, so that's right. And then here's the thing: what can happen at this point? Right? There's two things that can happen. Now, in regular Monopoly, there's like mortgaging properties and all kinds of stuff. But so there's two options, right? You can either go bankrupt or not. So if you go bankrupt, you lose. And if you don't go bankrupt, you don't lose. So let's see. I assume there's an arrow on that end. So if you're not bankrupt, you display the menu. Yeah, bankrupt means you have no money left. So now we've simplified Monopoly pretty considerably. So the idea here is that you know, you don't have to basically in real Monopoly there's a bunch of extra rules, like if you have houses, if you have properties, you have to mortgage them, if there's like, or you have to sell them back to the bank, and you have to kind of auction everything off to get the money you need to pay the rent, and then at that point, if you can't, then you lose. But in this game, you can't sell the property, you can't do any of the auction, so basically the game ends right here. Ooh, I think I can actually make this a termination. Yes. So anything that's rounded like this means that the game, this is the end of the... So basically this is going to mean end of program. So we can do the same thing here. All right, so yeah, if you display the menu and then you get user input, well, actually, so then you get the user input. And so if the user input is good, then you do one of these 5 things, right? So there's 5 different options. So let me move this to the center so that we can actually have space for it. So let's think about the 5 things that you might have to do, right? And so let's see here. What are the 5 things? I think there's 5 things. Let me check. Well, I mean, I know that there's 5 things. Let me just look at it on my own solution. Okay. Yes, there are. So here are the 5 things. You can either buy a property that you landed on. That's option 1. You can get player or get property info. You can get user info. And you need this because we're just not going to have enough space to display everything on the screen. So that's why we need these things. Like normally in Monopoly, you have all your cards in front of you, so you don't have, so you wouldn't need to do these 2 things in real Monopoly, but you have to do it in Piopoly because otherwise you can't see any data. And so this is build a building. And so this should be the last thing you implement. So this one should be left off for a while. And then the last thing you can do is end your turn. Right? And so let's see here. What can we do? Let's move all this. Let's move this over here because I don't think we'll need this space. Okay, so if you buy the property, right, there's a bunch of stuff you can do. So you can either buy the property, you can get the property info, you can get the user info, you can build a building, and you can end the turn. So what determines what you do here is going to be the what determines here what you do is going to be the user input. So remember, if there's bad user input, right? So this is if user input is good. If the user input is bad, then you can I think that there's some way to make a semicircle, but I forget how. So basically this would be bad option, right? If there's a bad option, you want to do a loop until there's the right option. I mean, you have the perfect. That's what. I mean, I guess I can run the program and show you things while we talk about it. I guess that's not completely invalid. Maybe I'll start doing that. But anyway, this is the whole idea of this is that you know, am I just talking about the project? Not really. What I'm doing is I'm kind of teaching you how to think about how to make flowcharts. And then what you can do is, let me just say that this is kind of going to branch into how you can write your program, right? Because if you have this flowchart, then what you want to do here, so once you get the property info, what you're going to do is you're going to go back to getting the user input. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. After you're done doing that, you're going to go back and get user input again, because basically once you get the property info, it's not going to end, like your turn doesn't end, there's nothing there. So basically yes, and then once you're finished with this one, you might also consider going back. Not sure if this is really good. Maybe I'll remove these kind of long circles. So yeah, once you're done here, I guess we'll just have them be a little bit smaller. You go back and get more user input. Once you're done here, you should go back and get user input again. So that's how that works, right? And my hint to you, each box can represent either a block of code or a function. And so the way to think about this is that these 5 options probably should be their own functions. And the reason why you want to make them their own functions is so you can code them independently. It'll really save you on time. So if no one owns the property, then the calculate rent part. Well, yeah. So if no one owns the property, then calculate rent is like 0 if no one owns it. But how do you buy the property? So how do you buy this property here? Right. You have to check. Check it's not owned. And then you have to check that it's buyable. And remember what buyable means in this case. It means that the price is bigger than -1. So in order to buy the property, you check, right? Check it's not owned. And so, and then you check that it's buyable. And then finally, you can change the owner and pay the price. Oh, one last thing. Before you do that, what you have to do is you have to check can you add keys to the dictionaries? Absolutely. The thing is that the dictionaries come out of the file, but who cares that... Is buyable just a boolean in that options dictionary? No, so buyable is the price. So if price is bigger than 0, or yeah. And the last thing you have to check is you have to make sure player has enough money. Right? Because if the player shouldn't be able to put themselves into bankruptcy by buying a property. So basically, if they have enough money, they can buy the property. But if they don't have enough money, don't let them do it. So And so basically, that's right. So here, basically here it's not owned. And here's what happens if it's owned, right? If it's owned, you go back to get user input. Here, you go back if the price is, right? You go back here if the price is -1. And so here, you go down if the price is bigger than 0. If it's owned, shouldn't it ask for rent? Yes, but you've already done that, right? So here, you've already calculated the rents. This is only in the buy property function. So basically here, if the price is bigger than 0, you go down. If the price is equal to -1, then you return to get user input. So I'm actually gonna, maybe I'll draw a long loop here. There we go. Like no payment of rent by the player who arrives on the property. Well, keep in mind you've already calculated the rents, right? So you've already calculated the rents and paid them. Right? So this is a different part of your code. This is just the part of your code where you buy the property. So the user should not have the option of not buying them. Yes, that's true. You don't have to buy the property in Monopoly if you land on it. So if the player has enough money, so you'd say yes. And then maybe if the player does not have enough money, what do? Do the same thing you always do. You go back. So when would you check if you pass go? Ah, that's here and move the player. So actually we could expand the flowchart. Let's actually do that. So let's say that we want to do more than just move the player. Basically, yeah, that's actually true. You do want to do that first before you calculate the rent. So let's put that in here. So if pass go, add pass go money. Do we have to use a pass go amount to the play game function? I implemented the take turn function instead. Yeah, so I mean you can modify some of this stuff. So, okay. I guess we should actually have one last thing here. The one last thing here should be get current player. Right? Because we want to get the player. Yes. So remember when you play Monopoly, the idea is that so pass go money is what happens every time you pass the start position. So you pass the start position, you add the pass go money. So let's see, let's change the color to that. Actually, and let me move this. Oops. Because what I want to do here is I want to move this so that it's in the right position. And right position, I mean this. So if are the properties in the dictionary already assigned with numbers for their board positions? Yes, but also you can use the position in the list instead of the position attribute in the dictionary. And start position is 0, it adds 200. Yeah, well, no, because, well, yeah, I guess you can. It depends how you implement it. Okay, so here's the one thing I want to say. The only thing I'll say is it depends on how you implement it. I think that's probably the best way to say it. So, you see here, whoa. What do we see? So if we look at this part of the program here, so there we go. So this part of the program here is really pretty linear, right? It starts, you load the map, you list if the list is not empty, actually we don't even need this extra thing. We can just we can kind of delete this box because we can just say if the list is not empty, you go and do this. There we are. And so you get the username and symbols. If it's bad, you reprompt. And then here you see that actually so here what you see is that you can look at this part here. So the idea here is that if you look at this is really a loop, right? Because you get the current player, you roll the dice, you move the player, you add the pass-go money if so, you calculate the rent, you might have to leave the game if the player loses, you get input. So when you get all the input, you're doing all this stuff, but you notice that this thing is also a loop, in a sense, right? Whenever you do get user input, it always comes back to get user input, right? And the only way out of the get user input loop is if you end the turn, right? So that's basically the idea here, is that the get user input is some kind of loop. And the reason why you know it's a loop is because you see it here. You see that in the flow, it goes down, 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 all the way, and I don't know which if statement is going to execute, but all the if statements are going to lead to here, and then this one leads back to here. And then you go around this loop again, go around this loop again, go around this loop again. So this here, you know, get user input is like the start of a loop, right? And so you see here, I haven't really drawn everything else out, but clearly here for get property info, you know, we can draw out similar boxes that would also and eventually lead us back to get user input. Building a building, again, that will also, you know, I don't care if you build the building or not. The point is, like, eventually you're going to go back to get user input. And so, and we might draw these out a little bit more in a second, but that's the idea here. And so you can't use exit, but you can, basically my hint to you is, like, you don't, exit's a really violent way to leave a program. It's better if your logic will actually exit the program kind of in a safer way. Anyway, so basically, here's the main program loop, right? So we can call this, maybe we can call this like the play game loop. Maybe. And then we can call this the, all of this stuff here is going to be the get user input loop, right? So you might consider making this its own function, or if it's not its own function, then maybe these are their own functions. Each one of these could be its own function. End turn doesn't really need to be its own function, because end turn will just change the current player and roll the dice again, move the player again, so you go back into the play game loop. So this doesn't really need to be a function, but these other four probably should be, right? And so you'll just have to figure out, like, what are you going to do? Am I going to send you the flowchart? Yeah. So let's do get property info and get user info, because I think we're getting pretty close to being done with this program. So what you're going to do is you're going to ask which property, right? So if it's a valid property, you go down. If it's invalid, you go for a loop, right? You start here, and you will end up back here. I'm gonna Google this. I know that there's a way to do this, and I just want to figure it out. Okay. Oh, that's not it. Okay, I'll look that up later. So if the property is a valid thing, then you will display the property info, right? Why do you want to use, why do you want to use try and accept? Like, that'll increase the level of difficulty of this project. No try, no accept. No, no, no. Just because I use it in some of my sample code or the base code does not mean that you should be using it in the rest of the project. Well, no. So what I mean by valid is if the thing exists, right? You can get the name of free parking, and it should just tell you to. Yeah, of course you don't know how to use try. I haven't taught it. So, yeah, don't raise exceptions without try, because then you'll just crash the program. So let's move this over here. So ask which user, and then so we're gonna have it so that you can display user info for that user, right? And so the thing is that I don't care if you're going to get the user info for the other player or yourself, whatever. That's fine. So and let's just have return to get user input. So I know that we're not really connecting it in terms of a is there a driver? Well, yes. There is. So what are the things that I've programmed for you? And I'll show you those. For build a building, I'm gonna leave this to be something that. Well, actually, let's just do it. So what are the things you need to do? You need to check if you own it, or the player owns it, owns the property. Right? That's the first thing you have to check. And then you have to check if the player has enough money. And then if the player has the money, you want to check if the building already exists. Right? So those are basically the three things that I can think of right now that you want to check. So if the player doesn't own the property, what do? We just return, right? We go back to user input. So if the player doesn't have the money, we go back to user input. If the building already exists, we go back to user input. And there's only one building, so that's something that I've simplified. So there's no like houses versus hotels. Yeah, there's just one building. No houses, hotels. Ooh, that's green. There we go. And remember, all things end up returning to user input anyway. So that's something. But remember that basically here there's a bunch of other options, right? So the other options, so basically this is, yes, the player owns the property, yes, they have the money, and no, it doesn't already exist, right? In the case of a no here, a no here, or actually a yes here, right? If the building already exists, then you just immediately return. to get user input. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I said I'm gonna upload it. I'll upload it. Okay. I feel like this is basically the entire game. So here's what I want you to do first. Okay? The first thing that you really should do, and let me just go through, let me actually now just look at the project and I'll show you what I mean by all this. So begin by experimenting with the load map function. So what I mean by that is this. So let me show you. So I think I showed you how we can experiment with the load map function. Let me just create a new Python file. Okay. So we want to go from board methods, import load map, draw, a display board. And so what about moving the user? So moving the user, so this is a big block of code here. Here's where you move the user, right? You move the user in the play game loop, not in the get user input loop, because the player never moves again once they land on a place. So you're right. Are we printing the board, or is it just describing with text? You are printing the board. I'm about to get to that. So for instance, let's not even load the thing. Let's just call it display board. Yeah, so let's say the board is going to be equal to an empty list. I'm going to say for I in range, let's say 40. And then I'm going to say the board I is going to be equal to string I times 5 plus new line plus string I times 5 maybe. So this is basically, remember the format for display is this. It's 5 characters, a new line, and 5 characters. Right, so once I do this, I guess we're going to go the board.append. And you'll see why I'm doing this in just a second. I guess I can. So, all right. Okay, so what this does, let me just print out what this does. And then you'll see what it does. So let's do it. Here we are. You see that what it's doing here is just printing out a bunch of zeros, ones, twos, three, etc. Right? Like this. I guess actually I need to be even more careful. I should take the slice from 0 to 5. So that we get this. All right. Okay. So now let me display the board. And just let me show you what happens when we do this. So first it's going to output all this crap from the print statements. But then here, what it does is, here's the starting position, here's the first position, here's the second position, here's the third position, etc. And so the point here is that you don't have to code this. This display method has already been coded for you. The only thing you have to do is change it from these strings, which are weird things that I just have displaying like the number in them, to actually displaying the information that you need for each position. So for instance, you know, like, what should I do? Is there a way to... So, something like that, maybe. So, basically, what you get to do here okay, so here's what you get to do. You basically get to do this. Let's not make it 40. Let's make it 8. So the name of position 0 is going to be faster. Whoops. Then Park Ave. Then maybe then I don't know. What are some other things? What are some names? Mayfair. And here's the last one. Here's the last one. Boardwalk, I guess. So we're using both Mayfair and Boardwalk. Here we go. So you see what this did, right? This thing, what I had it do at least, was it sliced off the first 5 characters, and it's just using those as the abbreviation. Yes. So, oh yeah, so yeah, if the thing is gray, it just means that it hasn't been used yet. You see how now that I've used it, it's changed colors. So, so basically here, you can, this is how you sort of do this. And so if you want to display a player's position, right, don't worry. So ljust5 is something that I'm allowing you to use this for this project. So what ljust does is it basically pads your string with spaces to ensure its length 5. So you don't have to use .format. You can always use something else. Like you can always just say like, I mean, it's just a way to insert. So you can do, I don't care if you do like this, you know, but that's actually probably a bit more complicated. I don't know. So like, yes. Yeah, I mean, ljust is, I'm just using it as padding, but yes. So this is the general way that you should work with the printboard function. That's right, padding. Because, so remember what the rule is. The rule is that that there's 5 characters, a new line, and 5 characters. And you see why there's 5 characters, a new line, and 5 characters. Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things here, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things here. For the format display, the function parameter will be a list of dictionaries. Yeah, it could be. Well, that's nice, isn't it? So, yeah, so the idea here is that this will basically make it... So I'm allowing you to use ljust because what it'll do is it'll just make sure that... does it actually cap it? It doesn't cap it. It just prints it. But it will pad it, so that's what you really want. But you see here that what the ljust did here was it allowed us to have all these different spaces. It put these spaces in so that the thing will display correctly. Because if these spaces weren't there, basically my function is just very specific. It just wants you to put 5 characters, new line, 5 characters, and that's it. So okay, so that's like the first thing to do, is just to play around with this function until you feel comfortable with it. And then you want to do like a load board, and you want to figure out how to combine load board with this, right? So for instance, when you do the load board, load map with, I guess, pi up 3.csv, we can print it out. And so what we're going to do here is well, let's for line in print line. So what's the name of position 0? Who knows? We'll just call it A, B. So you see that this is what pops out here. And so for the project, what you want to do is you want to use this abbreviation as the name of the space on the top line. Everything is just going to be displayed. There's no clear screen. So you see, basically, instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you basically just want to do this. Yeah, E with a few more spaces. Oh, huh. Yeah, E. Okay, so then what else do you want to do for this project? So for instance here, you want to figure out how to get the player to move around the board, right? So the way to set the player position is you can basically just remember that the player position is going to be in the second line. So what we'll do is we'll say for, well, let's say while s not equal to quit. And you can always use, so s is equal to input how many. And so if s is equal to quit, we'll quit. Otherwise, we'll convert it to an integer. And then what we'll do is we'll add, so we'll say position is, plus equals this. We'll set position to 0. And then what we're going to do is we're going to display the board. And so the board, we'll just put the board, except that I guess what we need to do is the board at position is going to have to be equal to the board at position I think that should do it. So how many? Let's move the player 3 positions. So you see that if you move the player 3 positions, you're going to get to here because this is 1, 2, 3. Now let's move the player 1. And now you see that I haven't deleted the previous player, so that's a problem with the way I'm doing it, but I'm not going to fix it yet. I guess I could actually fix it. Copy board is equal to list board. And then instead of using this, we could just do copy board. That'll fix that. So let's move the player 1 position. So let's move them 2 positions. So now they're at D. Move them 2 positions. Now they're there. Move them another 2 positions. Now they're at H. What happens if I move them another position? Yeah, quit should be a constant, technically. So let's do it. Interesting. Why didn't it break? Oh, good. Okay. I was like, please break. Yeah, so you see, every time I moved, I displayed the board. So yeah, some people are saying it. What you want to do is you want to say position mod equals like the length of the board. And that'll keep you in balance. So for instance here, you're going to say maybe move 2 places, then move another 2 places, then another 2 places, then 1 place, and now we're at H. And remember, this failed last time, so let's move 1 more place, and we're back at A. Right? So this is how you handle it. You basically just use some mod stuff. Do we display the board before you calculate the rent? I guess it doesn't matter. You can display or calculate, since calculation, but, oh, you know what I use? So my program, I think, displays first, just so that when I print the rent, if there is any, it's visible at the bottom. And right, because the problem is that when we load in a large board, you know, it's going to be like a lot of, it's going to be big in the user output screen. And so if you calculate the rent first, it'll be above it and not below it. And so here, it's nice to have everything below the map so that you can see what's going on. Ours shouldn't ask for how we want board each time. No, you ask for, you load the map. So basically, this little bit of code is some hint code for how to kind of start working on the project, right? I want you to at least make sure that you have the board loaded, and I want you to have movement done by the end of this week. So do not wait until next week to start on the movement stuff, because everything else, you see that, like, once you get all the movement stuff, so this is get current player, roll the dice, move the player, add the money, calculate rent. You don't even have to do this part yet if you don't have ownership done, but basically you can just bypass this. You should get user input and have them say end turn, and then get the next player and go around. So this is what you need to do first, just so that the player moves, the board is loaded, and everything works. And then you can work on these things individually. So you want to work on this one. So these 3 here are probably the ones that you got to work on. The buying property, getting property info, and getting user info. You want to do these first. I actually say that you probably want to get property info and user info first, even before you do the buy property, because once you do these 2, then you can start getting information about, like, if the property has an owner, so you can basically say get property info, and then get the property info, buy the property, and then check the property info to make sure that the owner's been changed. So these 2 things are a bit of code, But the whole point about these two functions is that they're not really supposed to be hard. They're supposed to tell you stuff. And they're also good for debugging. So do these first, after you do this. And then do the buy property. And then, if you have time, do the build a building thing. So that's the idea of this project. And also, that's the idea of flowcharts, right? I think at this point, you kind of understand how flowcharts work because we've built a flowchart that represents the project. So let's document properties. Okay, good. I think hopefully that's a bit informative. Maybe I'll even post this little bit of starter code just for people to play around with. Okay. So this is not code that you should actually use in your project, because this code, you should basically scavenge from this code for your project. But this is not really project code. You should just like take pieces out of it. Okay. And then I'll upload the design. And that should be it for the day. I think we've completed the lecture. All right. Okay, so I think I'll let everybody go. Yep. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Good luck on the project. Get to work. All right. L-just, left align, R-just. I mean, I'm just using L-just. I don't really care if you use R. It doesn't. That's not gonna matter. Okay. Outro time. Are these files in my GL? Not yet, because I just said I was gonna upload them, meaning they have not. I mean, they've just been created, so they gotta wait another 5 minutes. All right. That's it. Seal the ports. Okay, you should probably